Bill is back. It is a William Wednesday on the Podcast Daily. He is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward, and this is part 2 of the freshman focus breakdown from 2023, looking ahead to the second year usage and surge in 2024. So we did the offense on Friday, Bill. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right.
That was a freshman Friday. And now we're moving on to part 2 with the defense. So if you missed that last week, go back. We'll wait for you. We'll pause right now. Go catch up. And now we'll jump into the defense. And where will you begin, Bill? Most snaps from a year ago? Is that the logical place?
I think so. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I also will say that I am honored to have a podcast daily named after me. That was
yeah. Well, it's also Award Wednesday. We have a lot of those. But
there you go. We're both being honored the way we should be. Yeah, let's start with the guy who played the most snaps. The guy who I think was clearly the guy who clearly had the biggest role as a true freshman on the defense last year, and probably will of this class next year, almost certainly will of this class next year. That is Germaine Matthews, who played a total of 283 snaps last year, 192 on defense, 91 on special teams. Made a start, played in all but one game. Like, he was a mainstay, well, not a mainstay, but like a bit of a fixture, I think, on Saturdays, at least. If you were paying attention on special teams, he certainly was out there all but one game last year. So it was a nice freshman season for Germaine, I think. And now it's just a matter of what does year 2 look like, but like, he's definitely gonna play, and I think definitely play more, I'd imagine, than 283 snaps he played as a true freshman.
I would be shocked if a healthy version of Germaine Matthews didn't play more than that total. I've made this point with both you and Burham. Like, I feel like he has a chance to be the starting corner for this team. It may not happen. I recognize that. I'm not saying it as discounting Davison Igbinosun as much as I'm really excited to see what a second year of Germaine Matthews looks like. I would think the worst case scenario for him, again, if he stays fully healthy, and you knock on wood for that, is like sharing, getting a 3-way workload. And if not getting more snaps than Davison Igbinosun or Denzel Burke, like getting pretty close and getting back to one of those 3-man groups that we've seen from Ohio State in the past. Thinking back to the last truly elite defense that Ohio State had in 2019, they had one of those that worked out pretty well. So we'll see if I'm wrong and Germaine Matthews doesn't become corner number 2. That's probably because Davison Igbinosun had a first round NFL draft kind of season. And then you have a Damon Arnett and Jeff Okudah situation, which worked out pretty well for the Buckeyes that year. So we'll see. The bottom line is, I just think Germaine Matthews is really good.
Yeah. I mean, and even if it is, like, we know Ohio State has showed us that like a 3-man rotation does not preclude anyone from being a first round pick either. Right. So there's definitely a way or a path to that kind of draft stock for anyone in the cornerback room, even if this is more of a rotation. And I think it will be too. I'm with you. The only thing I remain unclear on is whether or not that is two players rotating through one spot with Germaine and Davison, or all 3 guys, including Denzel Burke, kind of rotating evenly through the 2 cornerback spots. And honestly, throughout the season, it might be a bit of both, depending on the game, depending on health, and whether or not Ohio State feels like it wants to give a certain player a little bit of a rest that week if the opponent and game state allows for it. So I think that'll be a little bit fluid, but I definitely think Germaine Matthews is going to play probably somewhat significantly more than 283 snaps. Now that does include special teams, and I guess there's a world where he plays less on special teams if he is a more prominent part of the defense. But I think this number next year for Germaine Matthews creeps north of 400, and maybe even into 500 if it's a true cornerback rotation, because then you're talking about 3 guys probably playing 600, 700 snaps apiece.
Yeah, part of this for me is also not just solely about a conversation about Davison Igbinosun and Germaine Matthews, but also Denzel Burke. When you look at the schedule, and I'm not going to try and discount all of the Big Ten teams that are on that, but certainly for the first 3 weeks, there's not a lot that Denzel Burke is likely going to have to do. Yeah. I don't look at Iowa, for example, as someone who's going to pose a tremendous challenge through the air. Maybe I'll be wrong in this new Brian Ferencless era, but like, there are certainly going to be opportunities Northwestern later in the year. You know, the usual suspects where Denzel Burke is probably not going to have to play a lot. That's a good spot where you can save him for your biggest opportunities while also continuing to bring along Germaine Matthews and potentially Calvin Simpson-Hunt.
Yeah. We can go to him. He's technically not the next guy, but we can go to Calvin Simpson-Hunt. It's okay. I will allow it. He was third on among freshman defenders last year in snaps. Malik Hartford was second. We'll stick a pin in the Malik Hartford conversation. We'll go to Calvin Simpson-Hunt. 78 snaps for him last year, 23 on defense, 55 on special teams, some more on special teams than he got on defense. He did play in 5 games. I actually thought that he had redshirted, but he appeared in 5 games. So he burned that red shirt. I don't think it matters all that much because I'm not anticipating him being here that long anyway. But he'll play more. Like I think this is a different conversation though than the Germaine Matthews conversation. Do you agree with that? Like his will be more of backup reps. I think not like pushing to be a rotational starter.
Yeah, I don't see that for him quite yet. And again, that is a conversation that is probably more about Germaine Matthews getting that experience and being slightly ahead in the pecking order than where Calvin Simpson-Hunt is. Not that he can't make that up, not that he can't be a very important piece and a likely starter in 2025, because I thought he had a very good spring from the stuff that we saw. And I'm excited about the speed and athleticism out there, but like probably not going to expand it beyond those top 3 into a 4-man rotation. So I would agree with you that feels like more first backup opportunities, second halves of games. Then you're going to start to see him get involved and get his feet wet a little bit more than that snap count total that you already mentioned.
Yeah, I think he'll probably play more on special teams too. If I had to guess, I can't recall. I usually make a note of like who is practicing at gunner on punt coverage team in the spring, and I'm sure I have it written down somewhere here, but I don't recall if I saw Calvin Simpson-Hunt there or not. But with his speed, and clearly he has a pretty good tackling ability too, based off what we've seen and the fact that he is a defensive player. I could see him doing that quite a bit, maybe, or even at the very least, like playing more than just 55 snaps on special teams. Kind of like just like keep him ready more than anything else, because he is that 4th guy, as you mentioned. I think I agree with that assessment. But also, if you're not going to be starting him, if you're not going to be playing him as a rotational starter, then you also don't want to like waste that skill set necessarily by only allowing him to get on the field maybe when things get out of hand. So a way to kind of balance that out would be to play him more on special teams. So I think you will play more on special teams this year.
It does feel a little bit slightly more challenging to figure out Malik Hartford's role, at least in terms of how many snaps he's going to get. You know that he's right there knocking on the door behind, the starters at the top with Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom. But, coming off of a spring where we didn't see him do anything at all, and then, it just tapered off a little bit. Nothing wrong with it as a true freshman. That's to be expected. Trying to figure out exactly where he slots in as a sophomore seems a bit more challenging for me at the moment than it might otherwise.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. He actually played more than I remembered. So Malik Hartford was on the field for 11 games. He made that start against, was it Youngstown State, right? He started against them because Josh Proctor was out that game. But Malik Hartford only lasted 11 snaps and then was replaced by Jahad Carter. And then like my memory is like, and we never saw Malik Hartford again. but he did play. He played 158 snaps on defense last year. He played 61 on special teams. Obviously, he was on the field against Michigan for one of the touchdowns that Michigan scored in that game, which I kind of put more on the coaches than I do on Malik, if I'm being honest, because it was like he had not really played a high leverage snap all year, and then he just like decided in the Michigan game that he's going to go out there and like be your dime back, and like of course that's where the ball's going to go. So
I think Bill, that was the only snap he played in the game, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. Yeah. So like that was a weird kind of tough spot for a freshman to be put into. I'm not saying like it excuses not making the play or getting yourself out of position, but it was a rather weird burden, I think, to place on a player like Malik Hartford, given how the rest of his season had gone. But I think he's like, if I'm making a 2 deep, he's in the 2 deep for sure. But if Ohio State actually needs to go into a safety depth, like what is the actual pecking order there? I'm not entirely sure. I think I would probably still say, even though Malik Hartford didn't have a spring, even though both Jaden Bonsu and Jalen McLane seem to make the most of extended reps in the spring, that Malik Hartford, I think, is comfortably this team's 3rd safety. It's just a matter of having Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs in front of you, right? So like those guys just aren't going to come off the field. So I don't really know how that leads to a path where Malik Hartford can get on the field as a defensive player. I think it's still mostly backup stuff for him and a whole lot of special teams work this year.
Yeah, I feel like I'm probably being like too much of a prisoner of the moment, thinking about Jaden Bonsu's spring and like getting out there with the ones and like discounting Malik Hartford too much. It's unfair. Like you don't lose a spot necessarily due to injury. It's not a knock on him either. Like the fact that he maybe could have made a play in the Michigan game and didn't. I'm not holding that against him, and I'm trying not to hold missing a spring due to an injury against him either. But I do think like I'm considering Jaden Bonsu a lot more than I did in the past, and that's obviously going to come at the expense of someone, which would be Malik Hartford.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. When Ohio State got Malik Hartford, I thought he was going to be really good here. And I don't want to back off that just because like his freshman season was a little up and down. And I'm not saying that you're backing off that necessarily. I am keeping an open mind on the future trajectory of Malik Hartford because I still think it has an opportunity to be quite good, provided he can stay healthy, right? Like we think it's a shoulder injury for him, right? Based off the bracelet he was wearing. Like that's not a ideal, issue to have as a safety who runs into people for a living. So we'll have to find a way to manage that, I suppose. But I still think he has a tremendous shot to be a very good player here. The deck was just kind of reshuffled on him in a very meaningful way with the addition of Caleb Downs. But I don't. If I had to pick right now, I would say that Ohio State starting safeties in 2025, starting deep safeties are Malik Hartford and Caleb Downs. That would be my pick at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
Yeah. So we can move to Jaden Bonsu, I guess, since he's a freshman. I don't know. There's probably not much more to say other than what you said. Like he has made himself interesting, I think, right? With the way that he played this spring. He did not play at all last year. Didn't see the field once. I think some of that was injury related, if not all of that was injury related. He just didn't get on the field, which made his emergence this spring, I think, all the more surprising, but nonetheless impressive. So I think he will definitely play on special teams and probably a significant role because he's just like a big body dude and moves well and he's going to hit people hard, right? He can be, I think, a little bit of a tone setter for you on like kick coverage and punt coverage if you let him run down there and smack some people. So I think he'll do that. And then the safety work, I think, is a similar conversation to the Malik Hartford conversation.
Yeah. Again, part of it's hard. Like we didn't see a ton of like full contact 11 on 11 throughout the spring. I think the reviews for what he did were mostly positive from the coaching staff, but again, that's another part of just maybe tapping the brakes. Seeing somebody with the ones always registers. It's on the radar. He took advantage of an opportunity. Now, part of that was essentially out of necessity with Malik Hartford injured, with Lathan Ransom coming back from the injury and not pushing it throughout spring, and then the transfer portal defections that Ohio State went through. So, it's not like he had a gangbuster winter workout. Like, he's got to be out there, and he earned a chance to go with the ones. And that's not necessarily what happened, but he did put himself in position to get those reps and then make the most of it. And then we'll see what that means in August. I'm not expecting it to be leapfrogging Malik Hartford, but sometimes things click when you are healthy, available, and get reps, and we'll see if he can carry that momentum over. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but it is certainly within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, and I think regardless of like where it goes in terms of roles for this year, I think it's great for Ohio State that both Bonsu and McLane like showed some flashes that they can play here, because you want to have depth in that room. We've talked a lot about safety depth a lot this offseason, and you don't. While I think Malik Hartford will be a starter in 2025, right? You don't necessarily want that to be a foregone conclusion. I don't think. Like I think you want that to be a healthy competition for who's going to play next to Caleb Downs when Caleb is a junior. So whether that's Malik Hartford stepping up or Jaden Bonsu carrying forward this momentum, or even Jalen McLean, maybe, who's not part of this class we're talking about, but another young, exciting player, you want to have options. So I think I feel comfortable saying that Jaden Bonsu looks like a guy who's going to give them options, which is like, I wouldn't have said that last year because we didn't see him play at all. So
yeah. Was Arvell Reese next?
He was next. Yeah, there was one other defensive back, but it was Cedric Hawkins who didn't play and then transferred, so we didn't talk about him.
Yeah.
So yeah, Arvell Reese was next with 53 snaps, all on special teams. Did not play a lick of defense last year. Only played special teams. Made himself known, I think, a couple times on special teams too, with the way that he kind of ran down there.
I think he might have forgot some things at the same time on one of those plays.
Yeah, so he's got to protect himself a little better. Because I think they'll want him to do some more of that stuff this year. But I don't know what the defensive role looks like for him. Like I do think when they're in the second half of games that are out of hand, like Arvell Reese should and I think will get some backup linebacker reps. But Jim Knowles has talked about him similar to the way he's talked about CJ Hicks in the past. Like you want to give him a very targeted, specific thing to do if you're going to put him in the game at this stage of his development. And Ohio State never did that with CJ Hicks. So I'm going to temper my expectations, I guess, as it relates to Arvell Reese being in a similar position. But from like a height, weight, speed, athlete profile perspective, there are few guys on this roster who excite me more than Arvell Reese. It's just I have a hard time envisioning exactly what his sophomore year is going to look like for him after only playing 53 snaps last year.
Yeah, I think Jim Knowles and James Laurinaitis and definitely Larry Johnson are pretty like fatigued about having to talk or address the jack position. But like, I just can't. Arvell Reese should play the jack. Like, oh my God,
sure.
Turn him loose and let him do it. I think you could make a case like Josh Mickens on this list too. Like that seems like tailor-made for him. We already talked about that a ton with CJ Hicks, and I think like other people got, maybe some people that watch like got excited by that idea, and we were really leading that bandwagon and it went nowhere. I'm sorry that we did that, but like there are at least 3 guys on this roster, including 2 of these freshmen, who could certainly do that. And will they? I guess I'd have to say probably not, at the risk of creating more, fever around it.
Yeah, I mean, those are the guys. Josh Mickens only played 1 snap last year. But he's like 230 pounds, and like just to me, it doesn't look like he's going to get any bigger. But it's like he looks like a football player. He's long. He looks like a good athlete. He just doesn't look like Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, right? So it's hard to envision him playing 4-down defensive end all the time. But you want to stand him up as a quasi outside linebacker / edge rusher. Yeah, I think that's kind of what it feels like they brought him here to do. And I think Arvell Reese, I would bet a sizable amount of money that is what Arvell Reese is in the NFL. Whether or not he's out at Ohio State, I don't know. But when he gets to the NFL, and he will, that's what he will do when he gets there. So I think he should do it at Ohio State. And they either need to like stop recruiting guys at that skill set, or maybe just turn them into defensive ends whole cloth and like stop mentioning the hybrid stuff, or just do it. Because, and I know this isn't a recruiting show, and I'm not trying to pretend like I'm an expert on it or step on Berm's toes in any way whatsoever, but I do watch Talking Stuff regularly. That feels like they're losing ground, like in the recruitment of Justin Hill, because they're selling him on a position that they do not use. So It's like, why are you doing that? 1, why are you doing that when you don't use it? And 2, why aren't you using it? So like, I think they need to do it. And it could be with any number of guys. Like we don't have to deviate totally off course here into a jack conversation, but when you're talking Arvell Reese, that is where my mind goes immediately, and I hope he gets to do a little bit of it this fall.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can actually speak this one into existence. Who knows?
Yeah.
I want to get my optimism up, but I just feel like I can't because of the last couple off seasons, and then it's just like, well, it was a good idea, I think, but nobody wants to use it.
Yeah, right.
So defensive tackle, is that next?
That is next. Those are the last 3 we have not talked about. I guess I'll give out what they did last year, and we can kind of talk about them as a group if we want to. So Caden McDonald played the most with 32 snaps. That was, or maybe it's 33. I might have my math. It was 31, I think, on defense, and I think 1 on special teams, and then a couple on offense. So I don't have those written down here, but he did play a few snaps of offense.
I think he had 3 snaps in the Cotton Bowl on offense.
Yeah. And then Jason Moore only played 7 snaps in 2 games. and Kenny McDonald played 6 games, and Will Smith did not play at all last year because he was, I think, on the unavailable list every week last year, and then it wasn't even a participant in his freshman spring. So this first spring is like basically Will Smith's freshman year, which I think means that he's probably a year away from like really being in the conversation to play all that much. But I'll be willing to eat those words if he wants to surprise people this summer. I think that'd be great for Ohio State. The other 2 guys, though, Caden McDonald and Jason Moore, I think you and I both expect them to play quite a bit. And I know you're a pretty big Caden McDonald fan.
Is that right?
Yeah.
People have picked up on that?
Yeah. I mean, I am too. How could you not be?
Yeah. I do feel like there's a wager in the works because you seem to shade more to Jason Moore's like prototype, like chiseled physique and freakishly long, strong arms, which is a good place to be. I'm kind of envious when I say it in those terms. Like you and Berm seem to be down that path, like Jason Moore, and Berm was like that, I think, even heading into last summer. And I just hear so many things about Caden McDonald, and then I become enamored by what I watch in the open viewing practices, and like, man, that the violence of those hands just reminds me a little bit of like early Mike Hall before it didn't ever quite get to the level that I thought for Mike Hall. And I'm hoping that maybe that won't happen to Caden McDonald and he'll be a monster. Like if either one or both, like, I don't care. I don't have to be right, but man, I do feel like I'm veering to an opposite path compared to you two. And maybe they'll just go out there together in 2025 and wreck shop side by side. That's probably a viable outcome for the Buckeyes as well.
That would be a tremendous outcome, and I think probably a likely one, right? Like there's Hero Canoe and there's Tymo Malone, and we're not writing those guys off. I think both those guys are going to have to play too, but it would be tremendous if this defensive tackle rotation could get to 5 or 6 guys, and I'm not even saying that it could be 4, and like these 2 guys, 2 freshmen we're talking about, Caden McDonald and Jason Moore, could be the next 2. Like I that all still feels very much up in the air to me. Who is going to be the next defensive tackle into the game after Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton? Hero Canoe would probably be the favorite if you put odds on it, which makes sense, and he's, I think, probably earned that with how he's played when he's been allowed to play. But I really, really like both these freshmen. This is not a unique thought. I just see Jason Moore and I think of Draymond Jones. And it has been a while, I think, since Ohio State's had a defensive tackle like that. Maybe it's been since Draymond, right? Like I think like Mike Hall was a devastating interior pass rusher, right? But he just didn't play a lot. Draymond Jones felt like an every down kind of presence when he was here, and just a really good pass rusher. So I think that's what Jason Moore brings to the table. But I also love what Caden McDonald brings to the table. I would hate to wagering on one means betting against the other, and I don't want to bet against either one of them because I think they're both going to be really important parts of this defense and starting this year, and then probably carrying that into the 2025 when at least one of them will be starting, I think. So they're both really promising players that I think people should very much be excited about this year.
Well, they're in that same boat about what we talked about at corner. If they're not playing a ton in the first 3 games, especially, something's gone wrong. Like they need to get more reps than they got a year ago. They need to get game snaps. They need to build that, and that's a twofold proposition. It gets you more playable depth through the course of the year when you're potentially playing 16 games, and it sets the table for 2025. Like Ryan Day has talked about this a lot in the last couple of weeks when he's done some media appearances, like, and throughout spring. They have to address those concerns because they might not have been playing the young guys early enough in the last few years. So you got to follow through with that. And these are a couple defensive tackles that fit squarely into that conversation.
Yeah, they do. And they'll, I mean, I'd be shocked if they don't play more. I think, honestly, everyone, and I guess it stands to reason, right? Second year, you should all play more. But I think almost everyone we talked about, not everyone. Maybe not Malik Hartford, maybe not the other safeties, but like Germaine Matthews, Calvin Simpson-Hunt, the tackles, Arvell Reese. Like, I think all those guys are going to see their roles change pretty drastically, I think, in a good way, going into this year.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. We're 2/3 of the way through it, which is a very exciting proposition as this offseason just steaming right along. Great to have Bill back on the podcast daily. you couldn't tell. He's been a little banged up, a little under the weather, but he's
Yeah.
trending in the right direction. And we'll talk a little bit more ball as we roll along on the podcast daily for the rest of this week. So thanks to Bill for jumping back in. I'm Austin Ward. This has been the podcast daily for Wednesday. We'll talk to you later.